it was a point in which people were living peacefully under the Pete Hollis Bridge. And when a series of newspaper articles ran, it attracted well-meaning Greenvillians, much like myself and you, if we weren't in this, day in, day out work today. But people who came and brought items hoping to do good, but turned into toxic charity. And others were attracted to that. And so it became quickly a larger encampment that swelled to over 100 people. And I'll always have loved Deb Richardson-Moore telling the story of when it became violent. I didn't love that part, but loved that she would always say, it was Reed Lehman who picked up the phone and said, we got to do something different.
And welcome to Miracles from the Hill podcast, where we share raw stories that display the anatomy of God's grace here at Miracle Hill Ministries. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe. And of course, you can like, comment, and leave a review. To connect with us, visit our website linked in the description box. And now, here is our host, Ryan Dirk.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome, hopefully, back to the Miracles from the Hill podcast. I'm Ryan Dirk. I'm your host. We are happy to have you here today. If you are new, welcome. If you have been here before, thanks for coming back. I always say to like and subscribe, but I got a new note today that says that I need to make sure to say leave a review and a comment. By leaving reviews and comments, it helps us to get our podcast out to more people. So please, leave a review, leave a comment. If we're doing something you don't like, tell us. We might change it. We might not. But if you don't tell us, we don't know. So thank you. We are here today with Susan McLarty. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning, Ryan.
All right, so let me introduce Susan. Susan is a buddy of mine and the coordinator of the Greenville Homeless Alliance. And you're going to wonder what in the world that is, and we're going to make sure to tell you. She's been in that role since 2018 after serving on a bunch of different committees and roles here in the upstate, the 2016 Affordable Housing Steering Committee for the City of Greenville, United Ministries Executive Board as Chair of Congregational Relations, and the Greenville Area Interfaith Hospitality Network. She's a graduate of the Diversity Leaders Institute at the Riley Institute at Furman. She's an elder with the Presbyterian Church and vice chair of the Greenville Housing Authority Board. She's, more importantly, married to George and has a wonderful daughter, Ellis. She's a graduate of North Carolina State. Oh, I didn't know you were NC State.
Yeah, go Wolfpack.
That's my dad's college.
How about that? That was my dad,
go
too.
Wolfpack. She worked for Milliken and Company and Westminster Presbyterian Church, which is when I met her. So we're excited to have her on here today. The reason that Susan's on the show is because she is one of the people in the center of Greenville helping to make a significant impact for homelessness. So we're excited to talk about that and talk about the Homeless Alliance and this idea called collective impact. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
All right, so we're going to jump in and talk a little bit about Susan's story. So I've known Susan for years now, and I don't know any of this part of her story, so I'm excited to learn. So did you grow up here in the upstate?
No, I did not. So do you want to guess from my accent?
I don't pick up an accent.
See?
So no, I'm not going to guess.
I mostly grew up in eastern Tennessee in
Okay.
a small town, Kingsport, which is part of the Tri-Cities.
Okay.
So not that far from here. But I also spent a short stint in New Jersey. And I
Okay.
think that's why maybe my accent is not so traditional East Tennessee.
How much time in Jersey?
About 4 years.
Okay.
But it was really during my early developmental years when I was learning to talk. And so we moved back. I was born in Kingsport, lived there, moved back when I was partially through kindergarten. And I remember my friends that I made once we moved back to East Tennessee were like, you sound different. You talk kind of funny.
So Tennessee added the twang, Jersey pulled the twang back out, and now you're left with this kind of neutral non-accent.
So hopefully.
Hopefully. Well, there's nothing wrong with a little bit of an accent.
There's absolutely not.
Okay, so did you grow up going to church, Christian home?
Absolutely. Yeah, I enjoyed looking at these questions ahead because there really wasn't a day and a time where I didn't know a church family and a Christian community of love and just support and encouragement in that. So I was baptized as a baby in the Presbyterian church. And then my parents had also been Presbyterian. So when we would visit grandparents, we'd go to the respective churches that they both grew up. Mm-hmm. My grandmother played the piano in my mother's church. My grandfather taught Sunday school to the one adult class. Both grew up in really small rural churches. And then my parents were very involved in our church. And so if it was open, my sister and I were there. And and I was confirmed in middle school where, that became my decision at that point to dedicate my life to Christ and to accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior.
Okay, so you feel like that process of confirmation was like the avenue that the Lord used to like introduce you to a relational Jesus.
Right. I think, in the tradition I've grown up in, it's the responsibility of the parents to give you that beginning point, mm-hmm. but then you make that decision and you become a voting member of your denomination at that point, which we take seriously.
Mm-hmm. So how old were you? You said middle school?
6th grade.
So what did life look like after that kind of moment in time when, your relationship with Jesus became yours?
I think I started seeking out more mentors at that point and really looked to some of my youth advisors, pastors. Mm-hmm. I also was really just proud of my family's long history of always being Christian and having come over to this country from Scotland. And I remember having a very small Bible that was my great-great-grandfather's when he was a pastor, and bringing my grandfather in to talk to a civics class. This would be high school now, but just remembering the pride that I felt mm-hmm. and the acceptance that I also felt in being safe to introduce that in a public school mm-hmm. in a time of life where you're sort of maybe a little more concerned about your peers, sure. what they think about you, what they may judge you on, but it was something that the whole class really loved. And my grandfather was a great orator. He was an attorney, and so he had a lot of stories to go along with this little Bible that had been our family for so many generations.
So, what is the clan name?
Mm-hmm. Ross.
But then you married. Is McLarty Scottish?
It's Scotch-Irish.
Scotch-Irish. Okay.
And my maiden name was Byrd, B-Y-R-D,
uh-huh.
so that was English.
Okay. Ross is what part of Scotland? That we're getting off on a tangent, but I'm curious.
I don't even know. I've never been to Scotland. It's on my bucket list. But we used to go to the Scottish games up in the mountains of North Carolina. That's the closest.
Yeah, I always thought that I was mostly Irish, and then ancestry, and then I confirmed it with my dad, that there's this huge Scottish root. Huh. And that I'm a Highland Scottish person, and it explains the red beard.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, great. So you, your faith becomes your own. You go to college. Mm-hmm. And what was your intentions with college?
So I loved art in high school, and my dad and my mom were both from North Carolina. And so I wanted to do something and be back in the state of North Carolina. So I ended up applying to several schools in North Carolina and was accepted into North Carolina State to study textile design, which was a great way to take my love of art. But as my dad said, honey, when this time is over, you're on your own, So it was they really pitched the degree as 99.9% of the graduates were placed in good paying jobs when they finished their 4 years of undergraduate. And that proved to be true for me, and what ultimately led me to working here in the upstate.
And not that that's a tremendous amount of time ago, but this is when the South was textiles everywhere, right?
Absolutely.
So you finish college and you go to work for Milliken
Correct.
right out of college?
Right out of college.
And have you already met George at this point?
We met in, you'll love this, polymer chemistry class
Okay. Oh, really?
at
So
NC State.
You guys had a covalent bond together.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got married out of college?
So George worked for Milliken, and it was a large enough company that when I was offered a job, it was in the automotive sector, and he was more in the manufacturing of, at the time he took the job, he was making like T-shirt. He worked in a plant in Lockhart, South Carolina. So we were in total separate parts, but yes. So we met in college. I was working in Marietta. He was in Lockhart. And then we got married a couple years later once we kind of decided, okay, we've been dating for a while. And
Long distance at that point?
I lived, so, you've been to Marietta.
Yeah.
A lot of people would automatically think Georgia when I'd say I work in Marietta, but I lived in Greenville. He lived in Spartanburg. Then when we got married, because he was in Lockhart, and so we both picked larger cities to commute to work, and Milliken is headquartered out of Spartanburg. So then we realized Greenville was a good center point. By the time we got married, his office had moved to Spartanburg, but I was still in Marietta. Yeah. So it would have been like a long commute for me if we'd chosen Spartanburg.
Yeah, so you kind of picked, if it's an L-shaped commute, you picked the corner of the L. Okay, so walk us from working at Milliken to you wind up when I meet you at Westminster. So how does the Lord use your experience, becoming a mother, all that to lead you back into ministry?
That's a great question. So what happened, I'll try to condense it, but when George and I married, we visited churches and we decided, because we'd picked Greenville to be our home, that we joined Westminster Presbyterian. And we got involved. We served as youth advisors, which led me into other areas, ultimately serving in a leadership role as an elder. And during that time of serving as an elder, I actually crafted the job description that I later would take. And so during that same time, we became pregnant and Ellis was born. And we both enjoyed our careers. However, kind of like you stated, we were driving this L and we were both traveling both within the upstate, but also within the United States. And I was traveling internationally. And so we decided, when I was called and asked if I would take the job description I'd written for what was called a volunteer coordinator, and it was a 20-hour-a-week position, that we prayed about it, and we also put all of our expenses out on the table and said, could we do this? And we felt like it would be a really good change for us as a family now that we had a daughter, and we wanted someone to be close by, in the Greenville area. And when we were working, we were always not, and we just would, leave early in the morning and return home at night. So I took the job, and she turned 1 shortly after I accepted that change, and really a new career. But I felt like I had experienced kind of a whisper of God saying, I have different plans for you now. And obviously, having a family and having the ability to be really involved in her life was extremely important to both of us. And so I'm just grateful, I think, that God used my interest in the church and opened up some passion and abilities that maybe I wasn't fully aware of, but it became a new career outlet for me.
So the job was initially volunteer coordinator?
It was.
Okay, so it clearly was not that when you left that job. So did you change jobs, or did the job evolve?
The job evolved. So when I took the job, it was kind of still a new position, 20 hours a week. And the person that we had hired when I crafted the job description only stayed about a year. So she and her husband were transferred to Texas. So it was really an opportunity to come in and take what we'd put on paper, see what worked, what didn't work, and then as that got going, staff changes happened within the pastoral staff at Westminster. And each time that occurred, we would have a transition point. And it takes a while to hire a Presbyterian pastor. And so as Ellis grew and, I grew more into the work, I assumed more responsibilities. So by the time she was in middle school, we'd had several pastoral changes, and I just kept keeping some of those responsibilities as new pastors were called. Mm-hmm. And then we decided to change the title to Mission Outreach and Congregational Care. And that was when I met you shortly after that. And we also agreed, because Ellis was now in like middle school, heading towards high school, that the hours of the job were increased to 30. And then about the time I took this job, we were considering, it was really a full-time position that I was grateful to have flexibility, but I was also ready to, have a clearer boundary of job versus church and family life.
So you, as staff, I'm summarizing here, as staff turnover and new pastoral staff are coming in, you wound up just putting on more and more hats.
Correct.
Right? You're adding more and more elements to the role. And so the Lord used that to introduce you to a lot of these community level issues, I'm assuming.
Correct.
So one day you wake up and a fair amount of your time and effort is spent helping people experiencing poverty, experiencing homelessness. Did the Lord begin to develop a passion in you for that through that experience?
Absolutely.
So talk about that. When do you wake up and you're eating and breathing and thinking about those issues? How did that evolve in you? Because that doesn't sound like that was your upbringing.
I would say I always enjoyed what we called mission trips. Mm-hmm. Most of those that I took as a youth were within the United States. And then once I arrived at Westminster, I read a book by Parker Palmer called Let Your Life Speak. And I think I had this realization of okay, I'm enjoying my work at the time with Milliken. That was when I read that book. But at the end of the day, I'm making polyester automotive fabric that produces millions of dollars, for this company. But at the end of the life of the car, where does that fabric end up? In a landfill. Right. And so when I started feeling this Let Your Life Speak, I was like, what do I hope that my life could really speak to? And because as I started getting involved in the church, I really saw that my passion was ignited when I could help people see outside of the church walls. To come to church and have that community and be energized each week with the word and with the sermon and the music and, the fellowship. Sure. But that the other 6 days of the week, your life should be speaking through relationships, through people that Jesus taught us to take care of and to minister to and to be with, in relationship. So once I was at Westminster and in the role of volunteer coordinator, because I had a lot of freedom and because of this church, Westminster was so proud of the history here in Greenville of establishing itself as a mission-minded church. I spent a lot of my time with people either already who were members or those who were interested in becoming a member of this congregation. What is your passion and how can we help you plug into the mission work of Westminster in this community or in as far as, we had international missions and national missions. And so, I think that is what God ignited or showed me, that I had a ability to help people also feel that and demonstrate that and build those relationships outside the church walls.
So I, a bunch of churches that are mission minded, they use this kind of Acts 1:8 thinking, right? That you take the message to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. I am clearly biased to Jerusalem, right? Like that is how God has called me. So did you feel, as these relationships are developing, a call more to local missions than foreign?
I loved it all, but the reality was we might be able to go for a week. I did one trip with the church that I led to Malawi, Africa, and we were there 2 weeks. But I was waking up every day, and my daughter was attending schools in inner city Greenville. And because I had the flexibility to be involved, I started realizing that some of the children in her class were coming from very different situations than we were. And yet they loved, everything about the school just as much as she did.
Sure.
So that was really, I think, again, an opportunity. And I saw teachers who cared and worked tirelessly also become mentors to children who might have, less fortunate situations at their home. And I thought, man, if those teachers can do all that they do, and here I am in a part-time job, maybe I could become a mentor. And so it was the teachers at Stone that inspired me, and it was started with the Frazee Center at that time. And so I became a mentor, and that really introduced me to a family that I'm still in contact with today. But their daughter at the time was in kindergarten and also attending Stone, and it gave me a chance to build a relationship and understand Greenville through a different experience than I had had to that point.
And so, these experiences eventually lead you to this room with this group of people that would eventually become the Greenville Homeless Alliance. So for our listeners, I know the story. Would you share how Greenville Homeless Alliance came to be?
Well, there was an incident called Tent City that this was around 2014, 2015. So I was at Westminster working in mission at that time. And I remember around 2015, I'd built a relationship with a person that we both know and love named Tony McDade. And I remember he emailed me a few times, and we were part of the Greenville Area Interfaith Hospitality Network. And then he called and he said, there's this really important paper that's been published. And I was like, okay, what is it? And he said, I've emailed it to you. Have you looked at it? And I had to be honest and say, I think I saw your email, but I haven't actually read it.
Sure.
And so then he sent me a summary. You don't have to read the whole thing, just read the summary. And I did. And it helped me begin to see why someone like Tony was very passionate about what was pulled together and put to paper. And for the listeners that want to see that original white paper is linked on our website.
We'll link it in the show notes.
Awesome. And it included a description of the job that I, am sitting here today working in. So that was the beginning after Tent City. What I describe, and please jump in if you want to add to this, but what I generally will say is it was a point in which people were living peacefully under the Pete Hollis Bridge. And when a series of newspaper articles ran, it attracted well-meaning Greenvillians, much like myself and you, if we weren't in this, day in, day out work today. But people who came and brought items hoping to do good but turned into toxic charity. And others were attracted to that. And so it became quickly a larger encampment that swelled to over 100 people. And I'll always have loved Deb Richardson Moore telling the story of when it became violent, I didn't love that part, but loved that she would always say, it was Reed Lehman who picked up the phone and said, we got to do something different.
Which it's important to note that this was like a pivot point for the service community, right? So everybody had up to this point essentially existed in their own bubbles. And certainly everybody knew each other, but there wasn't a collaborative spirit. And this meeting that results from that brings all these, people together for the first time, or at least in modern history. So anyways, keep going.
Yeah. So the others that it brought together included the City of Greenville staff and Greenville County staff, because as it's always been relayed to me, the Pete Hollis Bridge was built by SCDOT. And when the situation became violent and the people involved decided to close the encampment, they said, we just built the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was sort of close enough to the boundary of the city and the county that those two local governments came together for the first time and worked with service providers in a different way that really looked at each unique person or couple's needs and took money that by this point had become a collective pot of funds and uniquely addressed people's needs and moved them according to those needs slowly. It wasn't like a sweep like we hear about a lot in the news today.
That was the intention, was to go in there and sweep the encampment and just move everybody out. And so I believe that it was the voices of those from the service community that were at the table that said, hey, give us 8 months or however much time they asked for to go in there and work with these people, show them dignity and help them, self-resolve to something more positive. And to the city and county's credit, they said, okay. Right.
Which was really exciting from what we later learned had been maybe opportunities where they had not always worked together. Mm-hmm. A new way emerged. And so we have continued to build on that and have at each step of the formation of the Homeless Alliance tried to always seek to include the city and the county in the work. Mm-hmm. And we've been, knock on wood, successful in that.
Somewhat successful. Successful at times.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this tent city creates this collaborative group of people, results in this white paper that kind of says, here's the state of homelessness in Greenville, and here are the solutions that we believe will be effective to helping those experiencing homelessness. Even after that white paper, that group continues to meet and, several years later formalizes into the Homeless Alliance.
Right.
So what is the Homeless Alliance? What does it do?
We are a coalition of what we say are doers and change makers, both from the public and the private side, coming together around a shared vision and mission. So our shared vision is that everyone in Greenville County would have access to a safe and affordable home. And we can talk about that word affordable.
Yep.
And then our mission is that we seek to strengthen partnerships. And when we do that, we want to broaden support and increase options for people experiencing homelessness and who are seeking stability through what we all believe, is the best way to have stability is a safe and affordable home ultimately.
So go back to the vision. Say it again for us.
Safe and affordable homes for everyone in Greenville County.
So, we could probably pause on this and have like an hour-long philosophical discussion about what that means and whether or not that's possible. But one of the keys to that discussion is this idea of affordability. And so let's just briefly talk about that. So there's lots of articles in the paper that talk about affordable housing. What is talked about in the paper and what is needed may not exactly be the same thing. So what does it mean to have affordable housing for the people that we're talking about?
We use the definition that has been established for many, many decades now, and that goes to it should be affordable if you're spending no more than 30% of your gross income towards your housing expenses.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a renter, that would include your rent, but also your utilities. So let's talk about, some options in Greenville might be affordable in terms of rent, but we have one of the highest numbers of mobile homes of anywhere in the country here in Greenville County. And so what's often expensive about renting in a mobile home?
What's off the utilities?
The utilities. So what if the utilities end up costing you more than the rent? Then that's why, we try to help people understand that that's sometimes the misunderstanding. It's not just the rent, it's also utilities. Or if you're a homeowner, it's also your mortgage plus your taxes and insurance on your home.
So there was just an article published, I think 2 weeks ago, and I wish I could come up with the name of the article, and I can't. Maybe we'll find it and put it in the show notes. But Greenville is number 6 in the nation for rent increases over the past year. Surprisingly, Anderson was number 3.
I think they're number 2.
They're number 2.
I sent it to AD.
Right.
And I
so
was like, look at this.
Greenville's number 6. And rental prices have all but doubled in the past, let's say 2 years, right? It's kind of pre-pandemic. But even before the pandemic, we were already at a housing shortage, right? Wasn't there a report done by the city?
Right. So if we back up to this formation of the Homeless Alliance, the white paper came out in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
In 2016, the study that I was a part of with the city of Greenville that looked at housing affordability was published. And it was a moment that helped people, I think, understand what they already intuitively knew, but that there was this housing deficit. And the greatest deficit was at a rent of $500 a month or less.
Mm-hmm.
Which
doesn't exist
and barely, had been slowly in decline. So their study showed that, I don't know where you were in 2008, but in 2008, I was still at Westminster Presbyterian, but at that time, there were more units inside the city limits of Greenville that were at that rent, $500 or less, or a month or less. Then there were people who needed them.
Really?
And then it just kind of slowly had started to shift. And by the time this came out in 2016, it said we had a deficit inside the city of $2,500 at that rent, $500 a month or less. And I think it's important to note, too, that those units that we were talking about, the homes that were affordable at that rent, were really in the areas close to where Miracle Hill has operated for many, many years. The rescue mission over
almost 80 years in that location.
And Salvation Army, 100 years. So many of these options were really close to where our essential services had been placed and put into existence and been very successful for a long, long time.
So one of the things, and Susan and I have talked about this many, many, many times, but one of the things that I'm passionate about, certainly the affordable housing is something very important, but it's not the only issue, right? Like, even if we have the housing, if people don't have resources to become stable, whether that's mental health resources or case management or fill in the blank with all those issues, then it doesn't matter if we have a house, right? So the Homeless Alliance is trying to look at every issue. So what all does the Homeless Alliance do to try to continue that effort of identifying gaps?
So we do a lot of convening of diverse partners.
Yep.
We, as you remember, because we held it here at this building when we established the 2019 report on homelessness, we included partners from all the frontline service providers, but also people with the lived experience of homelessness.
Sure.
Many who came with Deb Richardson Moore at that time, and were working with their social workers at Triune. And so that's been an important element, bringing together people who are closest to the problem and those who wake up every day working alongside others who are in the experience of homelessness. We also, so when we convene, we try to listen a lot. What is it we're hearing? How do we distill that down? And what we came up after those many listening sessions, established 5 priorities that were put into our 2019 plan. And then that fed into a strategic plan that in 2020 was adopted. Mm-hmm. And in 2021, we established working groups based on that strategic plan to begin walking out the work. How are we going to shift these conditions in Greenville? And we have people who are volunteering their time and coming together with the support of what we call the Homeless Alliance as a backbone entity to support all of those in helping us now implement this strategic plan.
All right, so we're going to talk about, that was a lot. We're going to talk about all those kind of engines that are used with these convened working groups. But before we get there, let's back up just a little bit. So we have the Homeless Alliance, which is, for lack of a better way of saying it, it's a more organic group, right? Like people are choosing to be there.
We say a voluntary coalition.
Yeah, voluntary coalition. Much more eloquent than whatever I just said.
Choose. It's good.
Yeah. So similar and different from that is the continuum of care. So a continuum of care for our listeners, at the federal level, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, they essentially mandate that every community, which can get defined a little bit differently depending on the state, has a continuum of care which helps manage the resources for those experiencing homelessness. That's a long way of saying essentially there is a governing body that hands out federal funds to service providers that help those experiencing homelessness. And so we have a continuum of care here, which is made up from a voting standpoint of people who are funded through that resource. But, Miracle Hill, we're not funded through the COC. I don't have a vote on what they do, but I certainly partner with everybody at the COC. So how is the Homeless Alliance efforts similar and different from the efforts of the COC, which is another body convening service providers?
Yeah, great question. So one distinct part of the continuum of care for the Greenville area is that HUD looked at the state of South Carolina and divided the state up into 4 continuums. Mm-hmm. So the part that Greenville falls in, we're one of 13 counties in what's called the upstate continuum of care. And so when we talked about forming the Homeless Alliance, it was intentional that its focus was on Greenville.
Laser focused.
It
should be noted, though, that it's over 60% of those experiencing homelessness are in Greenville. Like when you look at all those counties.
We're the largest county in the state.
Right. Okay, so that looks at the total counties, and you're laser focused on Greenville. So that's the main difference.
That would be the main difference. We don't receive federal funds either. And so I would say if you look back at the history of housing and urban development and their initiatives around homelessness, you could see changes. I know you and I have talked about there was a time in which some of your beds counted as transitional housing, but then lo and behold, HUD kind of shifts and changes the definition. So suddenly a good many of your beds that are important in the solution to homelessness aren't even counted. So,
several hundred of our beds
several hundred
are not counted.
So So I think that's important to note in that the focus on Greenville really looks at the focus at the local level. Yes, we need to combine and work with all the funds coming into our community. But at the end of the day, we believe there's a lot of power and ability when we focus at the local level, and that includes local government.
So let's I'm going to rearrange our questions a little bit. I'm going to change to kind of the driver of GHA, and then we'll end with talking about Greenville specifically. So the Greenville Homeless Alliance uses a model called collective impact. Okay, so I've been involved with the Homeless Alliance since 2017, and I have personally struggled with what exactly collective impact is, how it is different from other models. So pretend like I'm back there and I'm still super confused. What is collective impact, and how does it actually make an impact?
So it's a framework
Okay.
that the Greenville Homeless Alliance is built on, and it uses elements that social scientists at Stanford University developed over a decade ago. So it's in some ways kind of still a new-ish, but not so new. And it was based on extensive research where they looked at communities that were undertaking community collaboration efforts. And they looked at these across the country, and then they said, what were the elements of success and what were the elements that caused these community collaboration efforts to fail? Mm-hmm. And then they developed the framework, and so that's what we have structured the Homeless Alliance on. And so you want to hear the 5 elements of the framework?
That's great.
It starts with a common agenda. And so if you were to go, and we can link this if you would like in the show notes, but we call the common agenda now our strategic plan. And then it fosters mutually reinforcing activities. So that means we're trying to align our efforts and also direct them towards a shared measurement. Okay. And then it works on establishing that shared measurement, and we could have a whole podcast about a shared measurement. But it also encourages continuous communication. So between all those partners that are part of this shared agenda. And it depends on having a very strong backbone. And that's what the Homeless Alliance was established to be, the backbone organization.
Guiding those efforts. So I feel like I've quoted this before on the show, but one of the things that Deb Richardson-Moore used to always say is that this issue won't get solved by the usual suspects. And what she meant by that was, it's great that this group of service providers came together and wrote a white paper. But when you're talking about a community-wide issue, arguably a national issue, right? This giant issue of people experiencing homelessness, if it's just left to us service providers, we don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the resources to accomplish it. And so collective impact invites everybody into the conversation. And so how many stakeholders do we have at the Homeless Alliance right now?
We have over 1,500.
Over 1,500 stakeholders. And so a chunk of those are service providers, but then there are people from all different walks of life, right? Concerned citizens, churches, allies from different area, government, everybody who would ultimately, it would be required for them to have some kind of buy-in to the solution, are then part of the collective impact to accomplish the solution. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. So under this model, GHA's efforts are kind of broken into these 4, and what I put on my paper was engines, these 4 working groups that are moving forward: educate, collaborate, advocate, and innovate. What does each one of those mean, and what does it do? Like the educate working group, what is that?
So each working group has a diverse set of partners involved. And for the educate group, we looked at the strategic plan and with the help of the steering committee prioritized what is the first and highest task from the strategic plan that we want the Educate group to tackle. So they have developed what's called Homelessness 101, and that is a educational session that we're working to get out into more parts and places in the community. And then they also this year have focused on a series of Mythbusters.
Okay.
And we're very excited. We've released a few of them gradually over this year to gain feedback, what's effective, what could be improved. But we're going to formally release the set that's the latest, greatest, based on the feedback in GVL today in mid-October. And so Educate speaks to the model that we're operating under that's working. How do we reach more Greenvillians to really understand what homelessness looks like in our community? And if we can reach a county of over 500,000 people, we would call that ultimate success, because then we believe that once you're educated, you can't not see the problem and you can't not be part of the solution. So that's Educate is tasked with that.
Yeah, so I think that's great. And that goes to kind of the purpose of GHA. So it's not just build a house, right? Like you are not going ground level or 10,000 feet. That's 100,000 feet up, under the idea that if you educate the public, then they'll do what? Like, what is the hope?
Then they will engage in what we would call sustainable solutions, not Band-Aids.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Okay, great. So Advocate. What is Advocate? What do they do? Why do they do it?
So Advocate is working to take the education piece, and then once we've been effective at that, because that's at the bottom of what we call this inverted triangle, which is, again, part of the model of collective impact. We're trying to shift what people believe and know about homelessness. And Advocate actually is at the top of the triangle, where we have policies, resources, and the flow of how that's directed throughout the community. And so Advocate would be working with local government to help educate more people, to help them advocate on what we have developed as a policy manual, that we have policies that we believe if we could shift and change some of those, it would get to some of these root causes of homelessness. And the steering committee was part of helping us develop that policy agenda.
So quick story. Years ago, you may remember what year it was. I don't remember what year it was. We were asked, we being those involved in the Homeless Alliance, to advocate for something at a city council meeting. I don't remember what it was. What it was doesn't matter. Simultaneous to that request, there was I think it was an ordinance about not leaving your dog out in the heat. And hundreds of Greenvillians showed up with, I think they had pink shirts on or something.
It was red.
Red. They had red shirts on to protect these dogs, right? Because somebody had left a dog outside in the middle of summer. And hundreds of people showed up. And nobody showed up to help the people, right? Like to advocate for the people who are living outside. And it was such a stark contrast for me on two pieces. Number one, how we sometimes get our values messed up as human beings. And then number two, the power of advocacy, right? So here are hundreds of people aligned to protect a dog. And it was, front page news, right? Like it was a big deal.
It worked.
That it worked. And at the same time, we have actual human beings that are living outside in deplorable conditions, and it was crickets, right? So the power of advocacy really does shift our world. When people are united for a cause, things change. And when they're not, things don't. right? Squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Right. I think we were at county council. That was a county. That was a county ordinance that the group was successful in passing. But we were there to work with county council on the motel displacement response plan.
Yeah, motel. And I think that like the day before it, you told us all to wear our green GHA shirts, but it was like white noise in a sea of. And God bless the people that were helping the dogs, right? Like I'm not anti-dog.
Oh yeah, I have a dog.
I'm just trying to make a comparison on advocacy.
We've talked about the zoo too, and the tiger. Remember the?
No, tell the listeners.
Or maybe it was the lion, but there was a point in which like $1 million was getting put towards building a new
lion enclosure.
And it was around the same time that we were excited about $2 million going towards affordable housing for humans.
Yeah. Sometimes our priorities get a little misaligned in life. All those things are important. The lion needs a new home. The dog doesn't need to be left outside.
Right.
But we are thousands of units short for affordable housing. So all important things. Okay. Not that I'm biased, but maybe a little bit towards collaboration and innovation. So what is collaboration? What does it do?
Collaboration places great emphasis on bringing partners together to improve and enhance, to create solutions for, we would say, helping us as a community either end homelessness or make it brief and rare and non-reoccurring, which is the continuum of care's vision. And so that looks like, we started all these working groups as we were still in the pandemic, but that working group has worked to help a funding that was made available through American Rescue Plan and helped put dollars out there to keep people safe during the pandemic. So we really appreciate what the Collaborate working group did with that. And then as that wrapped up, they've been working this year to help people understand, if I am myself experiencing homelessness and trying to find that next step, how could we simplify that so people can better understand it and more quickly know, well, I have now if it was Ellis and myself, well, she's 20 now. So that would exclude me from some of the, providers here. If I'd had a son who's over the age of 10, that's, just how do we help people better understand that? And then we believe that once the information is there, it's also helpful to those well-meaning Greenvillians who may meet someone who has a true need or who may be looking for a meal and they don't know where they can find that next meal.
Okay, and innovation. What does the Innovate group do?
So you're part of Innovate.
I'm part of Innovate.
We are looking for innovative solutions that we believe will help Greenville specifically solve this issue. And that group has taken the approach this year around better reaching and engaging more of our faith community in Greenville. And we have a list of 700 churches that, but once we started narrowing that down, we ended up offering a biblical justice forum to those. And we hope that seeds were planted through that will create things that we aren't even thinking about today, but that God is working through those relationships that have been strengthened by offering just last month this biblical justice forum.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I couldn't make it to the biblical justice forum. I helped write the questions, but there's going to be a video that comes out where people can watch that, and it was a group of local pastors that gathered together to talk about what is biblical justice, what is our response to it, so on and so forth. Okay.
The other side of Innovate has been looking at how do we determine what is the way to produce more housing options that truly meet this, where we're focused as the Homeless Alliance, which for your listeners, back to that, affordable is a relative term. So we're focused at any household that hits at 30% of our family median income and below.
Yeah, so that goes all the way back to the beginning of our conversation about affordable housing. So when you read about it in the newspaper and people are building affordable units, typically they're building 60 to 80% AMI affordable units. What is the area median income for Greenville?
So each year it gets updated, and this year ours went up again, and it's at $85,200.
85
for a family of 4. Now that's important, isn't it? That's when you hear that number, that's assuming a household of 4.
Okay, so if you do the quick math on that with your calculator on your phone, 60 to 80% AMI is not affordable housing. It is workforce housing at best. At $84,000 for the median income, it's arguably above workforce housing. Our people, the people that we're talking about that are experiencing homelessness, they need that, maybe now based on that, 20% AMI housing.
I would say so.
It's probably dropped back again even more. And the reality is that nobody's building it. Doesn't exist.
Very, very small amount. There
Very,
is
very
some in
small.
the pipeline. I brought one example to share too, if you want to hear this now.
Sure.
Okay. So we try to use data as the Homeless Alliance to drive our decisions and help inform the work. So based on data, and Miracle Hill has been a big part of this, our emergency sheltered residents reported income, and that ended up about a little over $1,000 monthly income. So HUD also, besides establishing the median income for relating the terms of affordability of housing, they established what they call fair market rent. Fair market rent also went up in Greenville and is at $871 a month for a 1-bedroom.
So that's literally 86% of their income.
86% would have to go just to the rent.
To rent.
Rent.
So that as long as they don't want to eat or have electricity or go anywhere,
They're great.
they're good.
Yeah. And then our unsheltered, we use data that was gathered through our continuum of care, and the average income reported for unsheltered is $836. So in 2022, for the first time, we, with fair market rent, surpassed the income
Of the unsheltered. And for our listeners, that income is primarily Social Security or disability. Correct. Or some type of stipend that they're receiving that is not going to get any better.
Correct.
Okay, that's a bleak picture, but we could do it together, right, Susan?
We can.
Okay. Okay, so let's work towards landing the plane here. How do you desire for our listeners and Greenvillians to be part of the solution?
We believe there's a way for everyone to be part of this solution.
Okay.
That could mean volunteering with an organization like Miracle Hill. It could also mean inviting, if you're part of a church or a neighborhood association, invite us to bring this Homelessness 101, where we will help share the good work of Miracle Hill and others who are on the front lines every day.
So one of the Homeless Alliance's values is courage. How do our listeners need to embody courage to help those experiencing homelessness?
Ooh, there are a lot of ways to embody courage. I would say it goes from a person that you might meet and you might believe or might not be sure if they're experiencing homelessness themselves. Like we get a lot of calls about what do I say? What do I do? We even get calls from some of our service providers who are not in homeless service work, but in affordable housing. And we're like, well, talk to the person, have a conversation, learn their name, learn a little bit about them, then try to direct them to the resources. Because we have so many resources in Greenville County. And we have a page on our website called Get Help. So we often will encourage. That's interestingly a point of courage, because as you've heard Deb Richardson Moore say, the one thing that she heard most often was that people experiencing homelessness felt invisible because a lot of people just choose not to even acknowledge that they're a human being.
Yep.
I think the other thing that takes courage is this question of affordable housing for some reason has this stigma. And when you talk about building housing for someone whose income is where we were just discussing, and maybe they've lived in a shelter to get out of that situation, or they've lived unsheltered, talk about that with your neighbors, with your family, and say, what if it was built right next door to me? I think that takes courage for us to say, isn't that what we're called as Christians to do? To welcome that stranger, to, help, I like to say, erase the margins that exist. But we have seen so many projects and development proposals that have been literally stopped because people who
Not in my backyard.
say, not in my backyard.
I want it to happen, but
Just
not in my backyard.
So that's two examples of courage. And then interestingly, back to the t-shirt example, if you're scared of standing up and giving public comment, which many people are,
Yep.
It can be courageous just to show up
Stand
and
in solidarity.
Stand in solidarity.
Okay, so if somebody hears what you're saying and they want to get involved with the Homeless Alliance, what resources are available? Where you want them?
Well, we'd love to have them come to our website and give us their contact information.
Okay.
And then we are each month sending out a communication piece we call GHA Engage. And so in that each month, we're going to give you opportunities to engage. And then we also do a GHA update. So you get 2 communication pieces a month. So we hope that we're engaging you and also helping you learn simultaneously as, we're working to solve the issue. And then every now and then we'll throw out what we call a call to action alert. We sent one of those yesterday.
Yep, I
know
saw
if you
it
saw
come
it.
through. It's in my inbox. Okay, so other than the affordable housing piece, which is certainly a big part of the puzzle, what are your hopes for Greenville in the future as GH8 leads efforts to make homelessness brief and rare? What do you want to see change in Greenville?
Well, I think we could agree we need more mental health services here, and that's a state policy decision, but it affects our local community. I think we could both agree if we could clone Mary Kay Campbell, we'd love to have an army, of Mary Kay Campbells. But that's part of our challenge is attracting and retaining workforce in spaces like mental health. And the Phoenix Center, we just listed a blog from Becky about what a difficult time they're having staffing the positions in the Phoenix Center.
Yeah.
And so that's my hope, is that, we can show people that this is possible when we come together. And we have many examples where you all are doing it, and we're trying to lift up those examples to also show that it never happens alone. Like
Sure.
There's always this incredible amount of collaboration that has to come together, and also for people who are doing the hard work themselves to change and transform their own lives. But that's my hope, is that we could help lift up these really positive examples. We're going to do that on November 15th at our Ignite Luncheon. And we truly believe that Greenville, and there's already people like AD who's been on your podcast that have...
Shout out to Adric,
who have heard God speak to them and say, I'm doing something special in the upstate, and I want you to come here and be a part of it. So it's our hope that we could truly help more of our country understand what we're doing here is unique and special, and a beacon that the rest of the country could look to as a really intentional model that works.
So if somebody, felt like that they wanted to get involved with the Homeless Alliance, specifically wanted to support the efforts of the Homeless Alliance because it's not federally funded, how would they financially contribute to the efforts?
Thank you for that question.
You are welcome.
And thank you to Miracle Hill for the support you've given since we started in 2018. We have a page on our website, just like most nonprofits, that says donate. So we would ask, go to that page. Any gift of any size can help make a difference. Obviously, reoccurring gifts can be set up from that page, and those are truly appreciated and help us plan better for our future as this backbone organization. Let's see, we will be having the Ignite Luncheon, and there's opportunities to be a sponsor of that. If you are interested in sponsorships, it's on our homepage of the website.
And I don't know when this episode is going to drop, so the Ignite Luncheon may have already happened, but we can still go to the website to learn about future events.
Correct.
Which is what? What's the website?
GVL Homes for All. So it's the number 4 and the word all.org. So GVL, HOMES, number 4, ALL.org.
Okay. Thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Would you do us the honor and close us in prayer and pray for Greenville and pray for those that are experiencing homelessness and those that want to be part of the solution?
I will. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for this time, for Miracle Hill's mission and ministry in Greenville and across the upstate. We thank you for Ryan's leadership. God, we pray for all of our residents of Greenville County, especially those living on the margins, those who are living unsheltered in our emergency shelters, doubled up in our motels and may not know if they can stay another night. Lord, we know that we get calls daily, families facing medical crisis, families living in their cars. But we also see how you are at work. And we pray, Lord, you'll keep us strong, help us to be present, to be there for our neighbors and with our neighbors, to keep those relationships at the center, and to keep you as our voice of reason and of inspiration and of feeding us daily through your word. Help us, God, so that Greenville can be this beacon of hope. Help us to use our gifts and our talents in all of the ways that we can be your hands and your feet. Help us be a light to others who may not yet know about the issue of homelessness, and help us draw them near so that we can all come together and have what we believe is truly possible, which is a community that values everyone and that has a place that everyone can call home. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.